Friday the 13th, Part 3, filmed in 3D, was released in theaters on Friday, August 13th, 1982. The film's tagline was to experience a new dimension in terror, as the film's villain, Jason Voorhees, literally came out of the screen to terrorize the audience. This was the first Paramount Pictures film produced in 3D since 1954. The film was shot with the new Aravision over and under 3D camera technique. This was the same technique that was used in Jaws 3D.
3D was still very much a gimmick. We had Jaws 3D, and this is one of the few 3D movies I've seen where you didn't have the big theatrical releases like we do these days. Every other movie now is 3D, and you kind of expect it. So even though the shots were very gimmicky, like I said, with the machete pointing, and there was no reason for you to be pointing a stick at me while we're talking, and it was very gimmicky, but it was a new depth of filmmaking that you really hadn't experienced before.
They used a Luma crane. Like the opening shot, I believe, it starts off inside a cabin and then pulls out, and now you're outside the cabin, and now you're farther back, and it's all done with the camera mounted on that end of that Luma crane.
It was a new camera. They weren't used to it. It was a new technique in 3D and how to shoot it.
But then with the 3D, they were throwing more money at this than they'd ever thrown at the previous ones.
It was just a really interesting, really exciting process to be a part of.
The 3D thing added a technical component that was more expensive, more time-consuming, more stressful. Part 3 was also the first film in the series to be presented in Dolby Stereo. To achieve this new style of three-dimensional effect, the shooting schedule would be grueling, as every scene needed to be shot multiple times from various angles. As if the demands of the rigorous 3D shooting schedule weren't enough, the film's shoot was plagued with problems. On one weekend, a swarm of bees infested the cabin, shutting production down for over a day until they could be smoked out. There were cameras rolling off dolly tracks.
One day, that crane just tipped over, and the whole thing went crashing down. And
the camera tipped over, the track tipped over, and it was probably maybe 15 to 20 feet of track. And everything had to be rebuilt, and I believe it damaged the camera.
That was not a pleasant day. There was a lot of people very scared.
You don't want that to happen on a film shoot.
To offset the expense of the increased production costs, the filming location was relocated from the northeastern United States, as shown in the first two films, to the Los Angeles area and closer to Paramount Pictures' base of operations.
Police Chief Scott Fitzsimmons had no comment about the murders when reached early this morning. Detectives at the scene, however, were baffled by the brutality of the killings. Bodies were found literally strewn over the 4-square-mile campground in the remote lake region.
The location chosen for the Part 3 shoot was in the foothill areas of the Santa Clarita River Valley, which was filled with side canyons and numerous dark, brooding oak trees. The property used in the film would later be used in films such as Meatballs 2 and Bulletproof, starring Adam Sandler and Damon Wayans. Over the years, there were quite a few occasions where people would trespass onto the property. Some of these visits included odd occurrences such as midnight weddings, porno shoots, witchcraft, and satanic activity, even possible animal sacrifice. Despite these bizarre activities, it remained a viable set that was used in other productions over the years since Part 3 was filmed there, and continued to be visited by fans of the Friday the 13th horror series. The cabin and barn were enjoyed by all who visited the locale. That is, until one fateful night in April 2006. On May 9th, 1980, audiences around the world were introduced to a new brand of horror film in Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th.
I think, Friday the 13th, with all the other great films that came out then, like Halloween and Texas Chainsaw, all those films that came out there, it was just seemingly like a new era into horror films.
The film was shot in and around the townships of Blairstown and Hope, New Jersey in the fall of 1979, with the camp scenes being shot at nearby Camp Novi Bosco, a working Boy Scout camp. The picturesque setting of the camp, nicknamed Camp Blood in the film, featured rolling hills and rustic cabins and deep forestry around Sand Pond Lake. Dubbed the first slasher film, Friday the 13th was a new style of horror movie that introduced graphic and gory special effects into a scary storyline. Despite being panned by critics, the film became a cult classic among viewers and took in roughly $80 million domestically and internationally. Right, the B movies that make A money. This was a classic example of that. The following year, on May 1st, 1981, Paramount Pictures released Friday the 13th Part 2. Chronologically, the film's story occurs 5 years after the events of the first film.
5 long years he's been dormant.
The setting of the sequel takes place at the Packanack Counseling Training Center,
Being a counselor isn't the gravy summer job everybody thinks it is.
which just so happens to be on Crystal Lake and all too close to Camp Blood. The film marked the introduction of psychopath Jason Voorhees.
I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason.
Not as an apparition, as suggested in the first film, but as an individual who never drowned and had been living off the land, eating wild animals and vegetation since his disappearance in 1957. The principal photography on Part 2 took place in August of 1980 in the scenic hills of Litchfield County, Connecticut, on North Spectacle Lake. While fans were excited to see the sequel released, many were disappointed with the copycat storyline from Part 1 and the trimmed-down special effects due to the Motion Picture Association cracking down on the gore allowed in this release. The series needed a follow-up that would reignite the fans' interest and elements found in the original. However, with Part 3, fans would be offered an extra feature not found in the first 2 entries, a new dimension in terror.
Friday the 13th Part 3 is the one movie that needs to be seen in the theater because it's a 3D movie.
The 3D effect and the credits, you know how they kind of come off? They came out like part way, and then the music changed, and they came out further where they literally were between you and the person sitting in front of you.
3D adds another dimension to the film.
I did see Friday the 13th Part 3 after it was released from the theaters.
Opening night, went to Westwood with my friends.
We got there a little early, and there wasn't anybody there. I thought, oh, no one's going to come see this. And my God, it was sold out.
It was crazy, sold out. I mean, it was number one for that weekend.
Friday the 13th Part 3 was the highest grossing 3D film of its kind.
Because it was in 3D with the glasses, there was that whole kind of odd experience of being in an audience where you turn around and look at everybody in the audience, and they all had the 3D glasses on.
I was back in Michigan when it was released that summer of '82.
And then the next night I went back and saw it with my family.
My family, the horror genre is not their thing.
So I went with some family members, and it was pretty crazy. It was fun to watch. It was fun to see.
Unfortunately for them, I don't die till 3/4 of the way through this picture, so...
And I don't think anybody in the audience knew that I was up there.
They watched, but as soon as I died in this film, 12 people stood up in the theater and left, and that was my family. I said, thank you, this has been great.
When it came to casting of the film's villain, Jason Voorhees, producer Frank Mancuso Jr., whose father was head of Paramount at the time, and director Steve Miner, wanted someone who was bigger and stronger looking than the Jason audiences experienced in Part 2. Enter Richard Brooker.
I actually met Richard in the UK back in the 70s. I opened the door and there was this tall, gangly, 6'4" man stood there. And he said, "Hi, I'm Richard. I'm your cousin." He was working for a circus, actually. He was originally a trapeze artist. He told me that he was going to work on the pipelines in, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or somewhere. And I later found out that he was actually running away from the circus because he was having an affair with the ringmaster's wife.
A former trapeze artist turned actor newly arrived from England to the United States, trying to break into the movie business. He was a trapeze artist. People die in that type of act. Richard had worked in all areas of production and was looking to step in front of the camera. Given his credentials and background, he would become the most athletic Jason to date.
Richard, when he got the part, there was a producer, a director, got the part, took the part basically, not realizing he had just walked by all these people that were going to audition, not knowing in reality that I just cut all these guys off.
The script for Part 3 called for Jason to wear a mask to hide his disfigured, grotesque face.
The Jason character had an elaborate makeup special effects process to get that look. And It took a long time to do that. And so when they went to shoot the next version, they didn't want to have to deal with that. They didn't want to have to deal with every day doing that makeup and doing that special effect.
The infamous look of Jason wearing a hockey mask came about by accident. When Steve Miner called for a lighting check, there wasn't time to apply makeup for the light check. So Marty Sadoff, the film's 3D effects supervisor, who was a huge hockey fan and kept a bag of hockey gear with him, he casually gave Brooker the mask. Director Miner loved it, and a pop culture icon was born. Makeup effects artist Doug White made many modifications, with the crowning jewel being the addition of the red triangles to the face. There were 2 prosthetic face masks created for Brooker to wear underneath the hockey mask. One mask was composed of approximately 11 different appliances and took 6 hours to apply to Brooker's face. This mask was used for scenes where the hockey mask was removed. There was a point during makeup where you could see that as they're applying stuff and putting padding on him and appliances and makeup, you could see he was just slowly, I'm just getting goosebumps talking about it. He was transforming. You could see it. In the scenes where the hockey mask is over the face, a simple head mask was created. Any Friday the 13th fan worth their salt knows that within the storyline of Part 3, Jason gets his identifying mask from the character Shelley, the prankster. Up until that point in the film, Jason's grotesque face is created with makeup prosthetics developed by legendary makeup artist Stan Winston. Given the popularity of Jason's mask over the ensuing decades, a case could be made for its inclusion at the Smithsonian as a cultural icon. After the film's wrap, both Brooker and Larry Zerner, the actor who portrayed Shelley, attempted to acquire the mask. However, their quest for the symbolic mask proved futile.
I did ask for the mask, and they were like, no.
It seemed nobody even knew what happened to the mask or where it went until 20 years later. It was discovered that the mask was in the possession of special effects coordinator Martin Becker. The mask had hung in Becker's workshop window, exposed to direct sunlight for all those years, deteriorating to a state of non-repair. Becker had simply thrown it away.
Part 3 was where the hockey mask became the iconic image of the franchise.
I had no clue that it would go on to be so significant and be such a big deal, and that I'd see kids on the street wearing hockey masks. No idea that that's what it would turn out to be. That hockey mask would be such a symbol for the movie for so many years.
I tried to get the mask, but they wouldn't give me the mask, but they did give me the axe that Shelley wears, the fake death axe, and he puts it in his head, and you can see, and that's how it works.
After his fan-favorite portrayal of Jason Voorhees, Richard Brooker would go on to star in Deathstalker and the television series Trapper John M.D.
Richard was he's a kind of larger-than-life guy, and he is British, so he speaks with an English accent.
I don't know everything about his background, but the fact that he'd been in the circus, and he was so peripatetic. He had this very wandering bohemian lifestyle, just wandering from one thing to another, trying one thing or another.
Most of the actors on the set were kids. We were teenagers. And Richard was an adult.
First time I just saw him walking around the set, he had the hockey mask on, and but he smoked a pipe, and he's walking around and he goes, "Errol, who am I going to kill now?" I realized I was going to like him right away.
Richard and I met at check-in at the airport. We were both going on a plane to New York to do Good Morning America. And he came over to me and he said, "I bet you never thought Jason would get you this far."
Fantastic guy. I met him, of course, on one of these Friday the 13th conventions. And we just hit it off right away. He was just absolutely the nicest guy you could ever imagine.
He loved to take the blade of that machete, of his, Jason machete, and pop it down on his table. Scared the shit out of me.
Richard had a great sense of humor. We joked around a lot.
Richard was a good man. The fans loved him.
Richard was experienced. He'd worked doing other things. He was a gymnast and an acrobat.
And he was incredibly well educated and cultured.
He carried himself with authority.
He loved to smoke and drink, and he had enormous bonhomie. He loved to be in a bar. His favorite place was to be in the bar telling stories.
The host with the most. He was just there for everybody and making everybody feel comfortable.
Creative, artistic, loud.
And he was big and tall and kind of quiet, and he made a definite impression.
And he told the greatest stories.
One thing about Richard, I can tell you that being larger than life, being Jason requires you to be larger than life, but Richard embraced it.
If you didn't have a good story to tell at any given time, he would just come up with one. You know, and the story would start to wind its way into, like, now wait a minute. You were drinking with Lobster Boy in Florida in the retirement village for circus performers? Did this really happen? The thing is he would tell these outrageous and ridiculous stories, but then I would talk to another friend, somebody who knew him better than I did, and find out some of these stories were true.
If you knew Richard, he was huge into horses.
He was producing rock concerts. He was producing television shows. At one time, I think he told me he was producing 5 different television shows at the same time. One of which was a show that I watched was Bill Nye the Science Guy. And I went, oh my God, you produced that.
In Germany, we didn't share the same table. We were right next to each other. And across the way and down the hall was Jeremy Bullock, who played Boba Fett. And I looked at Jeremy and I said, so you're Boba Fett, huh? He said, yeah. So how do I know that? His face is covered. How do I know that's you? He said, well, it is me. Well, how do I know that? Prove it. Prove that's you. I said, well, I got pictures here. And then say, yeah, but your pictures are awful. You need new pictures. Anyway, after that, Jeremy, Richard, and I became very, very tight.
You know, he had that technology background with the wireless microphones, and he did a lot of things with production with wireless.
I didn't realize that he had won an Emmy for an invention. And the invention had something, he tried to explain it to me one night. Of course, I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. But it was some kind of synchronization that allowed you to stop SIPD code and pick up the SIPD code later. And it was something that he invented. And then he told me, he goes, not only was it used for SIPD code, he goes, but every cell phone in this entire room and every cell phone that you have evidently used this invention that Richard invented.
We all went out to this little bar in East Germany. Again, of course, very few people actually spoke English there. And I dance. No matter what, I'm a dancer. And so is some good music going on, and I'll dance by myself, you know? And all of a sudden, I see Richard coming like this towards, and he goes like this on the bar. It's my glass. And everybody's, the whole bar is like, what's this about? And he goes up to this guy, and he pulls him. Richard, he goes, I saw him put something in that glass. And it was like, oh my God. If it had not, he took him outside very quickly, but I'm standing there in absolute shock because it never dawned on me. That wasn't the thing back in the disco era. We didn't have roofies, you know. And if it hadn't been for him, I just don't even want to think what would have happened.
In the evening, we hang out with other fans at bars, and we had so many, you know, bits and pieces. I can't recall them all because it would make my eyes wet, if you know what I mean.
Richard had an affinity for visual beauty, and his photography of sunsets has been enjoyed and seen by many through Facebook posts and other media outlets.
He had this thing to take these photos of the sunsets. And I said to him, Richard, why are you doing that? Nobody's going to see them. And he said, yeah, that is, he does this for a reason. I said, oh, what reason can that be? And I said, look at this sunset. It looks exactly like the sunset last week, and the week before, and the day before, and the year before. And he said, no, every sunset is different, blah, blah, blah. And he puts them on Facebook. So I asked him, I said, look, this is for the fans, yeah, you know, so they can like something. And he said, no, he's doing that because he's grateful for every sunset he can see.
In between his producing and directing duties, he would always make time to meet Friday the 13th fans worldwide.
Richard always made sure that everybody was having a good time at the shows. He was extremely good with the fans. One of the biggest questions to the fans that they always ask, well, how'd you get the job? It was so nice to listen to him because he told the story with enthusiasm as though it was the first time he ever told it to a fan, and it probably was the 15,000th time he had told it to a fan.
No. So you should be safe.
Yeah, safest place in the world.
You're safer with me than you are over there.
Appearing at his last convention in March 2013 in Nashville, Tennessee. Richard died suddenly on April 8, 2013 of a heart attack. The news of his passing was a shock to all that knew him. He was honored in the closing credits of Hell's Kitchen, Episode 7 in its 11th season, and in John Schneider's film Smothered.
Richard was one of the good guys, and I enjoyed knowing him. And if I ever saw him again, I'd say, Richard, I know this little bar in Santa Monica. Let's go have a drink.
Hey, Chrissy, how much further to the lake?
We would have been there already if some people didn't have to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes.
That's what
Part 3 story involved Chris Higgins and her friends getting away for the weekend to Higgins Haven, her family's summer retreat. The family retreat just happens to be on Crystal Lake, Jason's territory. One glaring problem was that the production was taking place in a suburb of Los Angeles, and there was no lake to be found anywhere close to the set. For the first time in the Friday the 13th series, a lake had to be created for the shoot.
The lake also is not real. I mean, there's water, but it's only about 2 feet deep. It's not a real lake.
The lake that was created for the scenes in the film was essentially a 3 to 4 foot deep muddy pond shot from low angles to make it look bigger than it actually was. Water had to be pumped in every day to keep it full, and shortly after the shoot was completed, it dried up on its own. Due to the demands of the in-depth 3D shoot, the cabin and the barn that served as the shooting locale were built specifically for the film. It was completed in early 1982. The cabin and barn would be filled with items and props for the duration of the film's shoot. An interesting fact is that the cabin in the film looks as if it is a 2-story structure, when in reality, it is actually a 1-story structure, as the footage reveals. In addition, the basement where actor David Katims' character Chuck met his demise actually never existed.
I know that there was a basement underneath the house. There wasn't a separate location because my death scene was shot there.
But I remember a definite basement, and I remember it being a 2-story structure. But I think the second story wasn't built to code.
So what was the cabin 2 stories? No, it's a movie cabin.
Yeah, this was definitely a prop cabin. It had certain functionality. There was a stairwell going up somewhere. Could have been a platform, could have been a second floor. I didn't have any scenes there, so I don't remember.
So it looks like, I mean, it is 2 stories, but there's nothing up there. Everything, they just redress it.
Whether the structure was a 2-story or not is really trivial when compared to what happened one night in April 2006. 4 trespassers, while drinking and partying, got their truck stuck in the mud.
Damn it! In the dash, there's a flashlight. Grab it, we're going back.
And returned to the cabin to seek shelter from the cold California night. They continued partying at the cabin until the cold began to affect their high spirits. They tried to get warm by starting a fire in the cabin fireplace. But even though the fireplace appeared to be made of brick and rock, it was only the bottom 3 or 4 feet that were actually made of these materials. The rest of the fireplace was a facade made of lightwood. The top half of the chimney quickly caught fire, which instantly spread to the roof of the structure.
When did I hear about the cabin burning down? I don't know that I heard right away at all. I don't even know if I I don't know that I did hear that it was had burnt down.
I mean, I know that that cabin was because it's the Valzoet movie ranch, so it'd been used in a lot of things. But I mean, it seemed like such a waste, especially if it was fans who were there and, set it on fire.
The 4 partiers fled, but not before capturing souvenir snapshots of the burning cabin. Where this iconic cabin once stood, now sits a pile of ash and ruins. The reckless partier who took pictures of the burning cabin boasted online about what had occurred that night. In the chat room of FridayThe13thFilms.com, he proclaimed, "Jason's dead." When fellow posters did not believe him, he decided to post pictures of the fire to prove his point.
I had gotten home and was reading through the transcripts of what was going on in the chat room and saw that earlier that morning somebody had came into the chat room claiming to have set fire to the Friday 3 house.
And when he posted pictures of the fire to the FridayThe13thFilms.com website, the website administrator contacted investigators.
Plain detective myself on the other side of the country, I was going to contact the sheriff's department there in that county and report what was going on. When the sheriff's department went to the person's house to find what was going on, it was interesting because the investigator also found movie posters for Friday the 13th, Jason's hockey mask, so they automatically knew that the person had a connection with this. And then they also found that the person had a camera with those pictures in the bottom of their closet wrapped up in a shirt.
He stated he posted the pictures and statements on the website to taunt the nerds, as he liked the movies but not fellow fans. The ending of this story would leave Friday the 13th fans with a bad taste in their mouth. The 4 suspects being from wealthy families with connection and influence, destroying this beloved set. Even though the district attorney was pushing for negligent fire charges, the outcome of the case resulted in the families ordered to pay heavy fines and the arsonists received probation. Friday the 13th history was forever changed and will never be the same. But what if the story ended a little differently?
No,